Hello there, listeners of the Bylines Network podcast. Welcome to the hellscape that is our current lives. I'm Julian in Bristol.
And I'm Chris in London.
So, an advantage to recording quite late on in the month, sorry for no March episode, by the way, listeners, is that we get to change the story about halfway through. Because we were going to be talking about Kemi Badenoch dropping net zero, but then happy days have arrived again from France.
It's not usual that the French bring good news. However, this afternoon, just a minor political earthquake occurred in France where Marine Le Pen of Front National, so I think they're currently the largest single party in the French parliament. Marine Le Pen has been convicted of embezzlement of funds from the European Parliament and has been banned from running for any public office for 5 years with immediate effect. That's regardless if she decides to appeal or anything like that. She can't do anything until 5 years is up, meaning she is out of the running for the presidency in 2027.
Now, listeners, we need to point out something important. It's not embezzlement unless it comes from the region of France, embezzlement. Then it's just sparkling corruption.
That- No, I mean this did upend the planned schedule of the episode today. I mean the reason for that is the significance, and people in England might be going, well, does it really matter? Well, it does really, because she was pretty much on course to become the next president of France up until, well, fairly recently.
I mean, I don't know if I quite go as far as to say she was going to be the next president of France, because the way the French system works is an extremely popular right candidate, an extremely popular left candidate, and the far right all stand candidates. And when the far right inevitably one of the spots, it is often up to the left to go, okay, not them, sure, you'll do. There was a very entertaining slogan from the noughties where the left party said, vote for the crook, not the fascist.
So I think there was a poll recently done, and it was sort of 42% of people in France wanted her to be the next president. So it wasn't it's not a small percentage, And unlike other sort of far right parties that we see across Europe, the National Rally, they're called, Marine Le Pen's party, they're not sort of seen as fringe anymore. And we've talked on the podcast about the trend about with the rise of right-wing parties in Europe, and it kind of the National Rally's rise has been going for quite some time, and it is quite safe to say probably one of the biggest it's probably one of the biggest obstacles to them sort of continuing on that march. But I mean, she's had support from since the judgment this afternoon. She's had judgment from, all of the people who are famous lovers of democracy.
Yeah, all the usual suspects, isn't it? So you have obviously Orban has
Yeah,
spoken out saying Je suis marine. I believe one of the ministers, one of the hangers-on of Russia, possibly the foreign minister, came out in defense of her. There's
yeah.
also I believe the prime minister of the Netherlands.
Geert Wilders. I probably totally demolished that name. You also had the Deputy Prime Minister of Italy backing her. Nothing really from the UK apart from obviously Nigel Farage, who said the charges are trumped up and she's been cancelled. And then obviously Elon Musk has put his 2 pence in as well. So
Oh God, has he?
yeah, so she's in very good company. Is old Marine Le Pen. But I mean, even actually, what I found interesting this afternoon reading the reaction was, some of the comments from uh sort of those parties in France as well who aren't necessarily aligned with her views. You had sort of a right-wing party in France that sort of Le Républicain, and obviously they're not part of the National Rally. And my understanding is that the individual who made the following statement isn't particularly a fan of hers. His name's Laurent Faquiez. Again, I've probably butchered that name. But he said that the judgment was very heavy, and that this is not a healthy democracy anymore, basically. And another comment which I found quite surprising, but also maybe not so if you really know much about his politics, is Yanis Varoufakis, who's the former finance minister of Greece, and he called the judgment nuts, and that it was lawfare, and essentially basically said that this is what happened when similar sort of time frames, similar actions that we saw with Trump in America when he was being convicted of all sorts of things, and it only benefited him really at the end of the day. And that's, I think, maybe the left's concern is it will sort of duplicate what happened to Trump in America, even though the charges appear entirely legitimate. And obviously, it looks like she's done, she's broken the law. That a judge found her guilty.
It's just this typical thing that I've seen a lot of the right do, where they commit a crime, they get done for doing the crime, and then they cry foul and claim that there's a witch hunt after. We saw that quite famously a lot with the annoying orange across the pond. I mean, the man got impeached twice for crying out you know.
Yeah, I feel like we don't talk about that anymore for some reason.
Uh, I mean, does it really matter anymore?
No, he won. We'll move on. No, we won't. Of course, at the Balance Network podcast, we will never move on.
Yeah, what do you think of her chances are for because she's appealing this. She said she's going to appeal this. Do you see any chance whatsoever of her, you know, overturning her judgments?
Well, I'd be a liar if I said I was an expert in French judicial proceedings. Um, but who knows? Ultimately, that's up to the judge at the end of the day. But you know, the 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 appeal that she submits or has submitted or is going to submit um, will not be heard for quite some time, maybe more than a year. So, the ban of standing for any public office for 5 years is immediate. So, she's and I know she's doing French news, well, probably about now, talking about her intents moving forward. But if you can't stand for public office, what really can you do in her position with the platform she has and what she's trying to achieve? And I mean, it's important to say that actually this ruling doesn't take away her current position as a representative for the um I'm going to also butcher the name. She's a representative in France, La Pas-Calais, I think it is. But that doesn't take away her current role. Like in the UK, if a politician was convicted of quite a serious event such as this, you probably have them with the whip removed, and you probably end up having them resign as an MP potentially. Doesn't look like that's going to happen for her. She's probably going to keep her role as an elected representative for now, and will sit out the 5 year sentence. But I mean, her protege, who's the president of the National Rally Party, Jordan Bardella, is basically the favourite to take over from her.
Oh
Um,
yeah, no, I saw him described on the BBC as Le Pen's Plan B.
yeah, and I mean, he's probably rubbing his hands with glee.
I haven't heard of him, and I don't know if he has like quite the same draw as Le Pen does. Like he might be the ties to Le Pen's Farage, as it were.
Yeah, I mean, he's pretty. I mean, she's basically sort of. I hate to say the word groomed because it sounds quite. It's just doesn't work quite well. But he is her protege. He's 29 years old. Um, and he's got a huge social media following. He's probably out of everyone in the National Rally the best place to take over from her, and that's a given. But for the next 5 years, it's absolutely certain she can't run for public office, so she won't be able to run for president in 2027. And then after that, where does that leave her? Does it leave her out in the cold? I mean, the party so far have rallied behind her. That wasn't a pun.
There's been a national rally around Le Pen.
Yeah, I mean they've literally called for like a national rally for her in support of her in the streets, and as the French do quite so well. I mean it'll be just the fallout from it, and we're still in early hours, but we'll have to see because they did quite well in the last presidential elections. There'll be a lot of angry people, I presume, out there in France tonight.
from French politics on this British news channel to the depressing reality that is British politics. And unfortunately, we're going to be talking about what I have called the first big mistake of the Labour governments.
Yes, in the planning meetings, it wasn't big mistake. It was another word, but we
Yeah,
are
but we're not allowed to say that, Chris.
no, we're a family-friendly podcast. We're
We're a
not allowed.
good Christian channel here. Yeah, I mean, what on earth were they thinking? I've been saying for the longest time that they're doing the unpopular things first because get it out of the way and hopefully have some growth from this. But this is something that is honestly, I genuinely think that people are still going to be feeling this several years down the line. For all those who don't know what we're talking about, Labour are cutting benefits for millions of people who rely on it. I think the stat that I saw is it's going to affect like 2 million people.
Yeah,
And the frustrating thing is that Labour helped, well, not build, but they expanded the welfare state. It's thanks to people like McDonald's that we are in the position that we are. And now we have effectively the red Tories going around going, what if we didn't do that?
yeah, and I mean, we'll sort of discuss like the changes sort of in more depth in a minute. But the one thing that I just cannot wrap my head around is the narrative around Pip. Yeah, and worth before launching into sort of this part of the episode to do a sort of explainer of some of the things we're going to be talking about. Because, I mean, whilst some people may be well versed in the complexities of the benefit system in the UK, a lot of my listeners might not be. So it's probably helpful to just quickly do a run through. So we're going to be, I mean, just to go point by point, we're going to be talking about universal credit. And if you don't know, universal credit was rolled out under the previous Tory governments to replace sort of older benefits. So people might have known those previous benefits as income support, an employment support allowance, and housing benefit. And universal credit replaces all of those things, and it's made up of different elements. So there's the basic element, the basic rate, which you would get if you're eligible, and then there's the housing element, which covers sort of housing costs. There's a child element, which covers if you have children, you get additional money. There's also carers element, and that's a specific element which you get if you are providing, I think it's at least 35 hours of care a week, or about that, to somebody, and they have to be receiving certain disability benefits for you to get the carers element of universal credit. There's also carers allowance that we're going to be talking about, which is different to the carers element of universal credit. And carers allowance is a sort of standalone benefit. You can apply for it again if you care for someone for at least 35 hours a week, and they will have to receive certain benefits as well relating to their disability or health conditions. So we're going to be talking about a little bit about that as well. We'll also mention the work capability assessment. And what that is it's an assessment that is done by the Department for Work and Pensions to determine whether or not you have a capability to work or a work related activity. And that's to assess basically whether you are whether your disability impacts your ability to work, or if it allows you to work not as much as everybody else. And that will determine your eligibility for certain benefits that relate to disability and health conditions. And what we'll be talking a lot about is PIP, or Personal Independence Payment. And that's a benefit, and it's not means tested, so you can claim that regardless of how much you earn. And it is designed to help with extra living costs if you have a long-term physical or mental health condition or disability. PIP is made up of two parts. You have the daily living element and the mobility element. And the amount that you get of PIP, there's a lower rate and a higher rate. And which one you get is determined by how much your condition affects you. And we're going to be talking about some changes to the eligibility criteria around PIP. But it's worth doing that brief explainer. Because, the discussions around these cuts or welfare reforms is sort of to get people into work and, grow the economy and blah, 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 blah. But, you know, and this has also been talked about in PIP, and you see it in interviews as well, and media pieces that have been done specifically on changes to PIP. And they're going, this will make people work and it will, they won't be relying on benefits. I don't understand why people don't or haven't challenged the idea that cutting PIP will make people work, because PIP is a benefit you can claim if you are working. It is not means tested. You could be in a job earning, for example, 100 grand a year and apply for PIP if you wanted to, because it is based off of the severity of your health conditions and the difficulty you face undertaking normal challenges throughout the day, like getting dressed, cooking, washing yourself, etc. So that's a narrative I just cannot understand. And to be frank, coming from a Labour government utterly sickens me. But it's not just that. There's also okay. So there are maybe some interesting changes which might be positive. So the scrapping of the work capability assessment, that's been called for a very long time by organisations who. But I mean that alongside everything else is just it makes me put my head in my hands as a socialist who voted for Labour at the last election. In case the listeners didn't realise, the last few weeks have been very very tough morally.
Yeah, I have thankfully escaped the shame of voting for Labour at the last general election, but I still want to root for Labour to do well because honestly, if Labour do well, then that means we won't have to have the Tories again. But all this is going to do is it's rolling out the red carpet for reform because the one big recruiter to right-wing parties is poverty. The one big recruiter for right-wing parties like reform is poverty. It's why the AFD is doing so well. It's why every single far-right party in Europe is doing well because people are desperate and they have had absolutely no help from the system. So sure, let's vote for the people who are very anti-system. I'm sure they don't mean what they say when they say stuff like, "Oh, let's destroy the NHS. Oh, let's get rid of all the migrants," because they're all saying life sucks right now, but we can help with that.
I mean, just on a very brief tangent because it does relate to what you've just said. I mean, what happened in London today? We had we had the Prime Minister writing a an op-ed in the Daily Mail about how angry illegal migration makes him. And, a big drive today. There was a conference in London on illegal migration specifically. And it's all about people coming over on boats and da 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 da, like pretending they're not refugees because most of them are. Like, so that tied along with the welfare reforms we're talking about today just lends to, they're trying to take leaves from the Tory and reforms books. And obviously, there's local elections coming up, so that might be part of the reason why they're going down that road. But it doesn't change the fact that this is going to screw over, hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions, actually.
Just such a shot in the foot. Like,
Yeah, and I mean, if you want really the impact of the proposed changes, so I mean, I'll run through briefly a couple of the ones that were announced. So there was the scrapping of the work capability assessment, which I mentioned. There's changes to PIP, so tightening of the eligibility criteria, which makes it harder for you to qualify. Essentially, estimates have predicted that will mean 800,000 people will not qualify for a certain component of PIP, meaning they'll get less money to pay for things to help them live. It was initially understood, actually, that PIP was going to be frozen before I think the government realised the scale of anger amongst Labour MPs, in which they then backed down from that. But they alongside that, they've announced that they're reducing the universal credit health element by 50% and freezing it for new claimants. So the money that people will get through universal credit for specifically having a health condition, that element will be reduced and cut. And also changes to carers allowance, which is I don't understand this one at all. It genuinely does seem to me like they're just doing that to try and save money. They're making changes to carers allowance, meaning that 150,000 people will not be able to claim for it. for either carers allowance or the carers element of universal credit. So, oh, that's also not to mention banning under 22s from claiming sort of any health or disability related benefits. That's my understanding of the announcement. Because under 22s famously don't have disabilities or health conditions.
How long before Labour or Keir Starmer just come out and say, all those people that are like who say they're on the autistic spectrum or have ADHD, they're all faking it.
I mean, do you want the other kicker as well? Do you want another kicker in the teeth?
Yeah,
So,
sure, why not? I mean, I'm depressed enough, so yeah,
you
another one.
we had the initial welfare reforms that Liz Kendall announced a couple of weeks ago, and then obviously we had the spring statement last week, where Rachel Reeves announced more cuts to welfare. But what was also interesting was that the government chose to release the impact assessment for the previously announced welfare reforms on the day of the spring statement. Now, a cynic would say they did that because it would get buried underneath other news stories. But the key takeaway figure from that impact assessment said, and it stated, this is the government's own figures. So it's kind of stark to see that they didn't. Maybe they've. I mean, I'm not saying they tried to fiddle the figures, but you know, their own assessment said 250,000 more people, including 50,000 children, will be pushed into poverty as a result of these changes by 2030. Now, a Labour government having that kind of verdict delivered on them by an impact assessment is disgusting. And I don't really know how ministers in the DWP can sort of stand there with a straight face and say that what they're doing now is for the good of the country, because it's not. When you have a figure that says you're pushing 250,000 people, including 50,000 children, into poverty, and you're going out to defend that, I think you need to have a really long, hard look at yourself in the mirror, to be quite frank. And we've talked about it before, and there's research, reams of it, about the impact that welfare cuts have on individuals, including on whether they live or die, right? And, it's well reported that choices made by the Tory governments of the last 14 years have resulted in potentially tens of thousands of deaths or more because of cuts to healthcare, because of cuts to social care, because of cuts to benefits. And that's, the researchers who provide the statistics say these are probably quite conservative estimates because there's not really a way of quantifying it. But to see a Labour government continue down that path is just so disappointing. And I know that lots of Labour MPs are frustrated by it and are angry by these changes. I mean, what will show is whether they decide to vote against it or not.
I get the feeling they won't.
No, but do you know what? It'll be for their constituents to hold them accountable, and I hope that they do.
So, do you reckon there's like any hope? What's I can't even finish that sentence with a straight face.
I mean, I think well, if you're talking about hope more generally, sure, I think there is. But I think that, at the moment, if you're an individual with disabilities or severe health conditions that claim benefits, it's not looking good for you. Um, you know, the Labour government wanted to make the welfare system better. They wanted to, that's what a Labour government should do. They should be supporting a social safety net. They should be making sure that individuals who have disabilities and health conditions are supported by the state because they need that. Lots of people need that. They rely on their PIP. They rely on the health element of universal credit. These aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They are people with complex needs that are already struggling. Let's not forget that we've just gone through 14 years of Conservative government, which has slashed the welfare state, you know, and then this is piling on again. And it's just to see the framing of this as we're going to get people into work, but what they're targeting is disability and health benefits it's shameful. It's shameful. You're not going to get disabled people into work by cutting
Mm.
benefits. You're just going to make them more stressed, poorer, and decrease their, life expectancies and quality of life and things like that. It's not going to work. And like you say, it will disaffect many, many people who voted for Labour because they thought that that's a party that will look after me.
Yeah, sorry, listeners. This is not going to be a happy episode to put out. It just sucks. It just straight up sucks. Like, I'm sick and tired of living in a world where being kind is not like the default, and showing sympathy to a group of vulnerable people isn't the default. Like, I saw a documentary last year during the election season showing how badly the Tory cuts to the welfare state had affected someone uh, who couldn't walk. The only housing they could afford to do on the pittance that they had was on the first floor. So they literally had to like slide down the stairs and then slowly walk with their crutches to the front door where their wheelchair was waiting. And I can't help but feel like the cameraman was like one of those nature documenters who's seen like a poor animal dying in front of him, and he's just kind of like, listen, do you want help? Please. Like, being disabled is a minority that could affect anybody. And if we're not willing to help out other people who are already suffering, we're just going to make even more people suffer. Like, we are all one dodgy fall away from our lives changing. And if we're not willing to help people based on the idea that it could happen to me, then I'm afraid I've got no hope for society.
No, and I mean, I'm not, listen, the messaging here is, we want to get people into work, and I'm not unopposed to that, but that does, I don't think that comes from cutting people's benefits. It comes from more regulation and obligations on employers to create inclusive work environments. And okay, there's a duty for employers to make reasonable adjustments, but let's face it,
Do they?
well, exactly. Employers, are they good at that? Not particularly. If you want to get disabled people into work, and being honest, there will be disabled people out there who want to work but need help doing that. That is what you should be doing. You should be going, how can we support you to get into a job that's meaningful and fulfilling? Um, but do that first. Like, I'm not saying do both. I'm saying do that. But if you're going to take away the money that people rely on to survive because you think, oh yeah, this, somebody in a wheelchair sat at home not working, but they could, but they're claiming PIP and that's bad and that's why they're not working. If that's your mentality and it's not, why is this person not working? Maybe it's because it's hard for them to get to work because public transport isn't accessible because they can't get into an office because employers do unfortunately look differently at people with disabilities regardless of the Equalities Act or not. You know, unless you're looking at those things, it's rather the stick than the carrot. I don't know if that's even right, but it's like they're getting a stick and going whack, 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 work, work, work. In- but there's no instead of actually providing that holistic support that people actually need, and the legislation that puts obligations on employers to make that easier for people, you're putting it on the individual. In fact, but you're taking their, you're taking their support away. That's not going to make them go to work. It's going to make them just suffer in silence. And well, I hope it won't be in silence because I hope that every MP who votes through those changes hears the voices of their angry constituents and those who are going to be affected by it. I really do. You can tell I'm very exercised by this.
So to end this barrage of screaming into the void on some kind of note, like, look after each other, listeners. Particularly look after those who are going to be affected by this. Write to your MPs because, God damn it, there's really not a lot else we can do.
And they will listen to you. Trust me, they will listen. They
And
they
don't let them grind you down. I've been Julian in Bristol.
and I've been Chris in London.
That was an episode of the Bylines Network podcast with me, Julian Greenbank, and Christopher Davis. It was edited by me, Julian Greenbank, and it was hosted on Spotify. We do hope that you'll join us next time where we're going to be celebrating a very special birthday. Until then, listeners, have a good one.